am Mantis.
Superheroes have been a part of the pop culture landscape for a while now. It's one of the most popular genres in the current cinematic climate. However, there was a time when the superhero boom just wasn't happening. Yep, we're talking about 1994. The MCU we know and love was over a decade away. Even Blade hadn't yet hit the big screen, so if you were a superhero fan back in the day, you were either watching The Flash or Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, on repeat. And during that time, out of nowhere, Mantis dropped. This was a new kind of superhero, a socially conscious one who had all of the science backing him up because instead of being a news reporter or a photographer, this hero, outside of his suit, was a black paraplegic scientist. This was revolutionary. It was bold and unlike anything that TV had seen at the time. You would think that it would have run for long, right? But nope. After one season, the show disappeared like it had never existed in the first place. So, like any sane superhero fan, you gotta wonder, what happened? And that is what we here at Marvelous Videos are looking into today. Before we start the journey of Mantis, we gotta look into the background first. There's a reason why Mantis is the gutsy superhero of that television climate. So, back in the 90s, we did have superheroes on television. However, they weren't the big pop culture boom that we see now. It was usually campy, kid-friendly, and had all the budget constraints possible. John Wesley Shipp was running around in his bright red rubber suit as the Flash, which aired in 1990. Sure, it was stylish for that decade, but it never really found its audience. As for Lois and Clark, well, it was more focused on the romance between the protagonists instead of their adventures. Thanks to Tim Burton, we did have Batman on the big screen, but not the small screen yet. It was still doing catch up there. And as you guys can guess from all the names I just dropped, there were no black superheroes, at least none leading live-action TV shows. The idea of a serious sci-fi coded black-led superhero TV show was completely unheard of and to a degree unfathomable. And despite all of that, Mantis dropped in that climate. Instead of tiptoeing into the TV scene, Mantis busted open all the doors with a gusto that barely any other superhero from that time had. Mantis had it all. It had a mission, a message, and of course, a really cool suit. At the heart of Mantis, we had a very creative duo. We had the legendary Sam Raimi. Yep, the same Raimi who brought us Evil Dead and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and we also had Sam Hamm, the brilliant mind behind the script of Tim Burton's Batman. So yeah, these guys, they weren't playing around. They not only liked superheroes, but they also knew how to create a myth that would grip the audience by the throat and make them stay on the edge of their seat throughout the entire show. Together, these two Sams decided they wanted to create a show that would be socially relevant and flashy. It would have the spectacle of comic books, but it would also have real-world consequences, grounding the show entirely. And to lead this kind of visionary show, they had Dr. Miles Hawkins, a black scientist who was paralyzed in a police shooting. He fights crime using his biomechanical exosuit, which, as you guys may have guessed, gave us the best superhero origin story and social commentary all mixed together. Guys, even in today's climate, we don't have a superhero who is this nuanced and done right. And yes, we're not talking about Echo. Needless to say, back in the day, Dr. Miles Hawkins was everything that TV superheroes weren't. He was nuanced, he was intellectual, he was vulnerable, and his skin color was also a massive topic of intrigue. He was out at a protest when Hawkins was shot and paralyzed. After his medical issues started, Hawkins found himself completely abandoned by a system which was supposed to help him, but instead preferred to pretend he didn't exist. So he did what every brilliant cyberneticist wishes they could do. He built the Mantis exoskeleton from scratch. This suit not only restored his mobility thanks to the high-tech stuff, but it also heightened his strength, speed, and senses. So in short, super cool supersuit. But wait, it gets better. Unlike most of the heroes in this era who were chasing after glory, Hawkins wanted none of that. He wanted to specifically go after corruption, systemic injustice, and police brutality. Topics that are still no-nos on daily TV even to this day. So, as you guys can guess, back in '94, these were topics that primetime shows would absolutely run away from. Set in Port Columbia, a fictional town, the stories of Mantis hit very close to home for all the viewers because this city was a reflection of every American city out there. Crippled with injustice. Mantis wasn't fighting against some swanky villain of the week, he was fighting against the system, and that was completely mind-blowing. In one of the episodes, he goes against this private security firm that keeps overstepping its own authority because it lets the power get to its head. In another episode, we saw him fighting to save tech that had fallen into the wrong hands. Each week, we got crimes that were very real, and the show juggled crime, science fiction, and real-world issues like government overreach and racial profiling with ease. This TV show wasn't the usual bubblegum TV that people were used to. This show was trying to be real, and so, of course, they needed someone who had the gumption to portray Hawkins on screen. So let's give it up for Carl Lumbly, the MVP of the show. If this name rings a bell, well, that makes sense because Lumbly is the voice for Martian Manhunter in the Justice League animated series, and he was Isaiah Bradley in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier decades later. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Lumbly in Mantis, and let me tell you, he was groundbreaking in that role. He wasn't cast as Miles Hawkins because he had the body of a superhero or a razor-sharp jaw. No, he was cast because he could embody the complexities that Miles Hawkins had. There was a quiet storm behind Lumbly's eyes. He embodied the righteousness, the intellect, and the pain that Hawkins had. And honestly, look at that face. Doesn't he look like the sort of man who would 100% build a cybernetic suit in his basement? We think he does. We also think he looks like the kind of guy who would go toe-to-toe with billionaires and corrupt cops simply because that's the right thing to do. So overall, Lumbly was the right person for the character. He had gravitas, which no one used to associate with superheroes on TV during that time. Then, along with Miles Hawkins in supporting characters, we had Dr. John Stonebreak, another scientist who was the moral compass of the show. He's a clever play on the typical Alfred/Pepper Potts sidekick archetype, but Stonebreak was different. Played by Roger Rees, Dr. Stonebreak wasn't there for exposition or comic relief, he was more integral to the mission. He added intellectual weight to the show and emotionally grounded the show's more outlandish elements. Along with him, the other recurring characters, be they cops, scientists, or journalists, together made Mantis feel like this working ecosystem instead of the typical superhero show. It had a range, it had a heart, and that's what made Mantis so special. And honestly, if we're going to talk about Mantis, we have to talk about the suit, because that was absolutely badass, glorious, heavy, and beautiful. The Mantis armor looks like a cross between RoboCop and the earliest sketches of the Iron Man suit. The chunky metal platings with the sleek black finish and the green eyes that glowed together made this exoskeleton a sight to behold. The neural helmet literally jacked under Miles's brain, and all of this was achieved by practical effects and a rubber suit. Sure, there's moments where it looks awkward, but not in the, oh, this is fake kind of way, but more in the, oh, this is moving kind of way. The 90s practical effects were on full display here, and while it's not as cool as Iron Man's nanosuit coming out of his backpack, it did look pretty good for the time. Also, the name Mantis is actually an acronym for Mechanically Augmented Neurotransmitter Interception System, which sounds so friggin' cool. And for a 90s TV show budget, the suit looked great. The suit soon became the show's calling card. It was instantly recognizable, and the fact that it wasn't just armor, but armor with a message made the suit conceptually extremely rich. So overall, when you watch Mantis today, you can see the DNA of later shows that followed the same formula, like Luke Cage, Watchmen, and Black Lightning. These shows blended cultural commentary with superhero spectacle, but Mantis did it years ago with no genre clout and a fraction of their budget. And despite that, Mantis gave us good episodes. It gave us episodes about stem cell research, media manipulation, and how the police can be militarized. Mantis also gave us murky ethical dilemmas and a protagonist who is haunted by real trauma. All of these traits made the show different and bold, and perhaps that's what doomed the show in the first place. Now, Mantis, as we mentioned, premiered in 1994. The pilot showed on Fox as this 2-hour TV movie, and it was a smash hit. It was cerebral, it was sleek, it was unapologetically black, and had something to say about race, power, and technology when it was in the wrong hands. Critics loved it, and the reviews came back positive. Fans were intrigued, and it felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a new superhero icon in the making. But then, the series finally aired and, well, things could not have been more different. The political undertones, gritty realism, the supporting cast played by Gina Torres and Bobby Hosea, all of those things that got everyone hooked on the pilot were simply gone. So, the tone of the show went from thought-provoking to Saturday morning cartoons for adults with adults. We know what you're thinking. You're thinking the show must have been rebooted in the 6-month time frame gap between the pilot and the series airing, and, well, you'd be right, to a degree. You see, the show wasn't killed because of bad ratings. Not at first at least. The pilot was really well loved. The thing that killed the show was the meddling from the network. It was reported that after the pilot episode aired, executives at Fox got cold feet because the pilot was extremely pointed. The whole concept of a black superhero who was paralyzed by police violence and who now targeted institutional corruption was too hot to handle, so the execs decided to play it safe and sanded down the edges. The first big chop-off was the cast. The entire cast, except for Carl Lumbly and Roger Rees, were gone. Gina Torres' doctor was gone. The black characters who made Hawkins' world seem more grounded, they were gone too. They were instead replaced by white, safe, and generic characters. The show was no longer about something. It was now about fighting a new sci-fi monster every week. The term superhero procedural hadn't been coined yet, but Mantis definitely had the prototype for that kind of mold. As if that wasn't enough, the city changed too. Previously, we had a city that looked like a real-world metropolis. That was swapped out for a slick, futuristic cyber city. Port Columbia, which was supposed to represent Detroit, now looked more like Jetsons by way of Vancouver instead. One of the biggest pivots in the story, which genuinely upset me, had to be the shift away from science fiction and social commentary to the campy monster of the week kinda antics. Initially, Hawkins was supposed to tackle gentrification, systemic racism, and even medical ethics, but now he was fighting against invisible assassins, time travelers, and, I'm not kidding, dinosaurs. What were these prehistoric creatures doing in a futuristic city? Who knows? But apparently it helped the ratings, so now we've got dinosaurs. The show went downhill from being a technologically grounded and socially aware superhero drama that Sam Raimi and Sam Hamm had originally come up with. This was more like the Power Rangers than we care to admit. And this whiplash was so offensive. What was supposed to be about a black man trying to regain his agency through intellect and invention somehow ended up becoming a show where he's basically RoboCop 2.0 fighting CGI threats of the week. The more you watch the show, the more you can see Carl Lumbly's professionalism crack, and just like us, he's also wondering what happened to the show he originally signed up for. Now at this point, you've got to be wondering, what happened to Sam Raimi and Sam Hamm? They must have said something. Yeah, so about that, as it turns out, right after the pilot aired, Sam Raimi, yes, the Sam Raimi, stepped away from creative control. Everyone knows that he's a passionate, weird, and fiercely loyal filmmaker, so when he noticed that the network was steamrolling his vision, he took a quiet bow out of the project. Officially, his name shows up as the executive producer, but let's be real. Unofficially, this man saw his bold, black-led superhero get gutted and turned into this network Frankenstein. And as for Sam Hamm, the mastermind behind Batman, yeah, he was also out immediately after the pilot aired. So what was left was a show that was glued together by people who were playing a guessing game of what Fox wanted. There was no vision, no creativity, no fighting spirit for what Mantis was supposed to be, and this was a fatal flaw. Mantis was no longer allowed to grow on its terms and was forced into a mold that it didn't fit at all, and as you can guess, that broke it. After practically butchering Mantis into a Kids Bob version, you'd think Fox would be happy about it, right? Nope, that's because the viewership tanked. And oh no, who could have seen that coming? Not us. The people who saw the pilot of Mantis were in for a politically charged sci-fi drama where a disabled black superhero led the whole thing. And then they watched the series when it aired, and unanimously, everyone was like, what the hell are we watching? And the people who wanted cheesy superhero schlock, the kind that Fox was hoping to cater to, well, they weren't watching Mantis to begin with. Mantis didn't have the branding that Batman or Spider-Man did. It was niche to begin with, and now, with the unwarranted sanding off, the niche that it started with was no longer interested in it. By the time episode 10 rolled around, the writing was on the wall. The series managed to limp its way to the finish line with 22 episodes, but it was clear that Fox had already lost interest. There was no promotion, no fanfare, and of course, no renewal. After its flashy debut, Mantis was cancelled just a year later in August 1995, and just like that, the first black superhero show on primetime TV vanished. The most frustrating part of this whole debacle has to be how many rich storylines simply didn't get the attention they could have. What happened to Miles's relationship with the black community when he tried to serve again? What about the effect of using the Mantis suit? How does the suit affect his mind and body? With his strong vigilante role, does he ever get the justice he wants from the law? In the pilot, all of these plot threads are introduced and hinted at, but then the network decided to course correct and we got the Monster Mash 3000, which definitely didn't have any room for this kind of story or nuanced detail. The season finale, which has time travel and a global apocalypse, because of course it does, doesn't even try to explain anything. It simply throws in the towel going, nothing matters, big whoop, and moves on. The finale is absolutely insulting to the fans who stuck around in the hopes that the show might eventually return to its roots, coming in a full circle moment, but it never did, and that sucks. But here's the kicker. Mantis may have been abandoned by the network and done absolutely dirty by it, but that doesn't mean it was forgotten. Over the years, it developed a passionate cult following. Bootleg DVDs made the rounds, and sci-fi forums lit up with retrospectives. Carl Lumbly's performance was regularly praised for being ahead of its time, and there's nothing I or anyone can say to deny that. Then, the 2020s rolled around and the show finally got the attention and flowers it always deserved. In the 2020s, the topic of representation is common in media, movies, and TV shows alike. As this conversation grew louder, fans and critics looked back to Mantis. They looked at it as a prototype. The attempt was flawed, but it was fascinating that someone tried to create a political, grounded, and black superhero on primetime TV when topics like this just weren't allowed on TV. When you think about it, Luke Cage, Black Lightning, and Watchmen, these beloved shows walk the path that Mantis carved out. Mantis was the first one to ask, what if the superhero was the one who society ignored? And because of that, we think it deserves more than just a footnote in TV history. The network's decision definitely ruined Mantis and turned it bad, but there are a few things that Mantis got right. It packed a ridiculous amount of ambition into its 22-episode lifespan. Some of these ambitions came wrapped in the 90s cheese and camp, but underneath all that, this was a network superhero show with brains, balls, and a backbone. This wasn't just about a guy in a cool exosuit, it was also about identity, injustice, and what happens when the system breaks you and you use science to come back stronger than before. The show was nerdy, but it was also political. Mantis attempted something in the mid-90s which only became mainstream decades later. The last cerebral black superhero we got was Black Panther. The superpowered vigilante trying to serve his community? That's Luke Cage. The story about power, disability, and justice? Well, that's Daredevil. But before any of these shows came into the limelight, we had Mantis. And the showrunners didn't know what to do with that, so they killed it. But the blueprint remained, and that became the foundational DNA. The first man who deserves the flowers for this show has to be Carl Lumbly. He carried Mantis on his back. He gave Dr. Hawkins a quiet sensitivity, a wounded dignity. Hawkins wasn't a wisecracking guy, he was cerebral, conflicted, and angry. He was a man who had layers, and Lumbly did him justice. He played him like a real person, and he didn't stop there. He voiced the Martian Manhunter in the DC animated universe, giving us one of the most soulful and mournful superhero portrayals ever put into animation. He also gave us a heartbreaking performance as Isaiah Bradley in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, playing a super soldier who was erased by history, which ironically mirrors his own legacy as Mantis. If you look at Lumbly's career, you can draw a straight line that connects him from Mantis to Isaiah Bradley, and once you draw that line, the realization seeps in. Maybe the whole Mantis endeavor wasn't a failure at all. Maybe Mantis was just a bit too early. The seed that Lumbly planted in 1994 didn't bloom until 2020, and while that was a long time to wait, it was worth it, because when it bloomed, the whole trip was undeniable. But between 1994 and 2020, a lot of things happened. For years after Mantis, black superheroes weren't a thing. They were either sidekicks like War Machine or punchlines relegated to supporting roles. But then, things started to turn in 1998. If you're a superhero buff, you probably already know what came out in 1998, but in case you don't, it was Blade. And with Blade's debut, the idea that a black superhero couldn't get asses in seats was shattered. But Blade was still underground. It was violent and disconnected from the traditional superhero tropes that we usually expect from superhero films. He wasn't wearing any capes or underwear over his clothes, but he was wearing sunglasses at night, and that was definitely a trend. Then there was complete silence for years. The 2010s rolled around and something changed. After the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in full swing, the conversation about diversity came to the forefront, and studios finally started taking black heroes a little more seriously. In 2016, we got Luke Cage. In 2018, we got Black Lightning, which was the same year we got Black Panther, which changed everything once and for all, proving that black superheroes weren't niche, they were essential. And all of them owed something to Mantis. Even if these shows weren't directly inspired by Mantis, Mantis was the test subject. It was the what-if scenario. It showed studios what would happen if they were to take a chance, and it also showed them what would happen if they didn't give that black superhero enough space to breathe. But then again, the truth is, if Mantis hadn't been sabotaged, we would have gotten these shows at least 10 years earlier, if not more. Another aspect of the show that was way ahead of its time has to be its portrayal of disability. Miles Hawkins is a paraplegic in a suit. His disability isn't cured by magic, and the suit doesn't fix him. The suit is just a tool, a workaround that helps him go beyond his limitations while not dismissing them. This is very rare in superhero movies. Usually the characters are magically healed or their disabilities go away once they suit up, but not Mantis. This show made Hawkins' disability central to the character. This gave him a unique emotional arc as he started working around the trauma and loss of his previous life with the help of technology. Sure, the tech gave him his physical prowess back, but will he ever regain his old life? Probably not. And that hits deep. This show wasn't perfect, especially after how it lost its focus, but I'll be damned if we don't admit that this show laid the groundwork that a lot of our most beloved superheroes stand on. It also laid out the groundwork for disabled heroes. In a better world, Mantis would have opened the doors for several disabled superheroes and would have made them mainstream. Instead of that, Mantis became the case study for nearly 20 years. While there's no denying that Mantis was a political statement in a superhero costume, it was also a science-forward show. It was clear how much the writers loved their tech talk, and we had so many episodes that delved deep into neurological theory, memory science, and even experimental weaponry. This made Mantis the one superhero created by people who preferred Isaac Asimov over Stan Lee. The neuro interface, aka the Mantis suit that Hawkins uses, isn't some comic book mumbo-jumbo. It is, in fact, based on hardcore science, as it theoretically makes sense to create a neuro interface that would bridge Hawkins' severed spine. This sci-fi stuff was also a big plus on Mantis' record because that also showed people weren't actually averse to nerdy tech talk. We, in fact, love it a lot. Now gather around, folks, as we take a moment to appreciate the original pilot of Mantis. If you've never seen it, you should. This is a moody, deliberate, and very mature, even shockingly so, episode. The pacing of the show feels more like an HBO prestige drama instead of a superhero show from Fox. The tech feels grounded, and the social commentary is clear. The aesthetic is just beautiful. You can clearly see that there was visual confidence in the pilot of the series, which, sadly, the later episodes never ended up capturing. Also, bear in mind that this aired in 1994, the same year Pulp Fiction came out, and The Mask hit theaters. With all of that coming out, here was this show which wanted to give a clear message that maybe superhero media didn't need to be loud and silly. Sadly, the networks didn't care much about that message. If the series had actually followed the tonality and the ideas that the pilot set up, then who knows? Maybe we would be talking about Mantis the same way we talk about Batman the Animated Series, a show that redefined a genre. Thanks to fan resurgence nowadays, Mantis has found its way back into pop culture, especially amongst YouTubers, black sci-fi fans, and video essayists like us. Reddit threads, blog posts, and even TikTok deep dives have shown up discussing Mantis, and each of these small pieces has breathed life back into the show. People have started to understand that Mantis was never a failure, it was simply a prototype that got screwed over because the network was too afraid to take risks. All of this fan attention has made its way to Carl Lumbly, and in interviews, he's expressed surprise and gratitude to the fans for loving the show because it made him feel like the show meant something. But that's the thing, the show always meant something. Even at its worst, Mantis was still a show that gave us a visual of the Black Vision, resilience, and righteous fury we wished we had the guts to show earlier. It gave us a hero who didn't need alien DNA or magic hammers, he simply used his brain and rebuilt his body to take on the broken world in the hopes of fixing it. And that would always matter, even to this day. Let's not mince our words. The death of Mantis was a big loss. This was a creative implosion. One of the smartest, boldest, most adventurous, and forward-thinking stories of that era was shut down simply because it dared to be bold and something different. With its abrupt ending, we didn't just lose a show, we lost stories. Years worth of stories that were never told, plot lines that remained unexplored, and of course, a hero who never got to evolve. This wasn't just a mid-tier show that fizzled out, it was a show that could have changed TV history as we know it. I mean, think about it. Miles Hawkins is a doctor, and as a superhero, he wasn't here because he wanted to fill the diversity quota, he wasn't a catchphrase-dropping one-note guy, he was an intellectual powerhouse who used his knowledge to regain control of his life. In the era where sci-fi heroes were just white dudes punching aliens, Hawkins offered us complexity. He wasn't always likable, and sure as hell wasn't always right, but he was always compelling and had a reason to fight. If Mantis had continued, we would have seen the way Hawkins's internal philosophy changed. It could have either sharpened, evolved, or broken down completely. This man built a suit to fix a world with corruption, yeah? But what would happen when he finally realized that the corruption in the world cannot be out-engineered? Would his sense of justice start to blur? Would he move into more ideological solutions? The tension between saving the system and destroying the system was already there in the pilot, but we never got to see it completely paid off. Imagine a second season. Here, Hawkins is completely disillusioned with himself. He wants to keep fixing a world that doesn't want to be fixed. What would he do then? This arc back then would have been a game changer. Also, another thing we lost with Mantis was serialized storytelling. Mantis was being aired in 1994, long before Buffy, Smallville, or Arrow made serialized superhero shows a norm, so Mantis could have been a pioneer in that regard as well. Initially, Sam Raimi and Sam Hamm wanted to give us serialized ambition. The pilot set up the political conspiracies, shadowy elites, and tech geniuses who are navigating it all with experimental suits and personal vendettas. With that kind of setup, it was evident that the show was not all about the villain of the week kind of thing. It was supposed to be a vigilante slow-burn thriller that was hiding under that sci-fi shell, but Fox got nervous and executives decided to flatten it out. They got rid of the serialized storyline for self-contained plots and dropped the entire cast after the pilot. This has to be the most baffling retool in TV history because they literally erased their blueprint even before they began. If the series was allowed to run, we probably would have gotten something like Watchmen in structure, a tightly wound narrative with long-term payoffs and character arcs that would unfold over time. It would have been one of the first sci-fi shows to treat continuity as gospel instead of throwing it in the mud. The Mantis exoskeleton had a message. We told you that at the beginning of the video, and that message is simple. In a world that tried to immobilize and ignore Miles Hawkins, he was going to keep moving. It was a big triumph for science and a bigger middle finger to the systemic power structures that abandoned him. But then, the show barely scratched the surface of the suit. The suit was the ultimate tool of mobility, and it opened a realm of possibilities. Like, what if Hawkins ended up upgrading his suit with alien material or biotech? What if the suit began to control Hawkins' emotions like what happened with Doc Ock or Venom? Or what if the suit started reacting to Hawkins' emotions, much like Iron Man's extremis armor? What if the suit actually malfunctioned at the worst possible time and Hawkins had to confront head-on the limitations of his tech and body? There was even supposed to be a plotline where the neural interface would damage Hawkins over time. Effectively, the ultimate tool became a ticking time bomb, but this was never resolved. A second season could have delved into that. Maybe Hawkins would have to deal with memory loss, identity fragmentation, and even hallucinations because of the constant neural feedback. What if he began losing himself in the very machine that gave him purpose? What I'm trying to say is this. Mantis had the perfect setup for a post-human arc. We have a black, disabled, genius protagonist, and we could have made him question what the importance was of staying human inside when the world around him only cared about his machine. And all of those thoughtful character arcs and plot lines were thrown in the dumpster for the sake of time travel and lizard people. Oh, and dinosaurs. Can't forget the dinosaurs. Back in the 90s, superheroes were jokes. They were about everything except for being serious. But Mantis was different. It wanted to be serious. Not in a cynical or grim-dark way, but in an aspirational way. It believed that brains could beat brawns any day. You could tell genre stories with social commentary, racial injustices, and personal responsibilities, and you would not lose your audience. And Mantis wanted to do all of that before it was trendy. Before the Marvel Cinematic Empire started off, before Black Panther became a global movement, Mantis was there. If we got more seasons of Mantis, we would have been introduced to a gallery of villains tailored to challenge our hero both intellectually and ethically. We could have gotten media manipulators, tech moguls, mob bosses, the whole 9 yards. These would have forced Hawkins to grow and adapt in a way no gadget could. We were this close to having a superhero show that would have meant something. A show that looked at the broken systems around it and said that it was still fighting. Port Columbia, the fictional city of Mantis, is one of those rare cities that looked and felt real. It had the industrial tone of Detroit, the heart of Gotham, and the high-tech sheen of a cyberpunk city. This city had texture, but we barely got to experience it. We have so many questions after the first episode, like what was the mayor trying to hide? Were the police for or against Hawkins? Were there any tech companies trying to weaponize the exoskeleton? The pilot hinted that there were layers of institutional rot and covert surveillance, but all of those threads got yanked out when the show shifted. In another world, Port Columbia would have been a recurring character. It would have been a city that would have evolved alongside our hero. What if, in the 3rd season, the whole city turned on him, or better, a new vigilante shows up but starts taking things too far? The morally gray areas of interest write themselves, but instead of that, we got a forgettable city where villains stole satellites. This show could have rewritten how networks viewed superhero shows. Mantis was the test case for the audience in many ways. If it survived the 2nd or 3rd season, we would have gotten a full-on expansion of its universe. Hawkins may have gotten his protege. He could have found a hidden community of scientists. Maybe we would have gotten episodes focusing on the social movements, protests, and political assassinations. All of this was on the table, but it required patience, trust, and vision, and Fox had none of those. Marvelous verdict. Mantis wasn't perfect, but it was the first black superhero who had ambition, brains, and something real to say. It dared in an era where these things weren't even imagined, and in one brief moment, everything Mantis stood for worked. But then the studio blinked and gutted the show completely. We lost what could have been the roadmap to success, the signal flare of change, the proof that the audience was ready for something new. And since it was canceled, decades later, here we are, still playing catch-up. If someone ever tells you that genre TV has finally evolved, remember that Mantis limped its way through the gory studios so that everyone else we praise today could run. Let us know what you guys think about Mantis in the comments down below, and we'll see you guys in the next one. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.